The sacred feminine is rising all around us, and it's time to take notice. In today's video, we're going to look at exactly what is going on, what's happening in the culture that is so in need of this sacred feminine rising. We're going to define the sacred feminine. Spoiler alert, there's not a really clear definition, and I'm going to tell you why. And finally, we're going to look at some tools that can help us to connect more deeply with the sacred feminine so that we can navigate the challenges that we are seeing in the world today. Welcome, I'm Kim Marie. I'm so glad you're here. This channel is all about empowering women to step into the fullness of who they are and find the empowered woman within them. So first, I want to talk about a culture in need. Right now, there is so much that is unknown. We are so filled with uncertainty. People are running scared, really, filled with anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety and depression. We're seeing it rampant in the culture. We're seeing so much of the divisiveness, this tension and a sense of isolation and disconnection and separation. We're also looking at these signs as kind of symptoms that need to be fixed. And what I would like to propose is the idea that these are signs of the sacred feminine rising. And as we dive into some of what the sacred feminine is and is not, I hope that you're going to understand why that is a little bit better. But I'll start by just saying that as we see so many of these things happening, this space of feeling like there's so much uncertainty, so much chaos, so much challenge, so much difficulty, that is actually the realm of the feminine. If we look at the womb as the ultimate archetype of feminine, the womb is a space of darkness. It's a space of uncertainty. We don't really know what's going on there, and we're kind of in the dark. We're ripening, gestating. All of that is happening without a clear certainty. Anybody who's been a mother and birthed a baby for the first time knows that no matter how much our bodies seem to have this incredible wisdom to know what to do to bring life into this world, if we've never done it before, we're filled with a tremendous amount of anxiety and uncertainty. So I really believe that the feminine, the sacred feminine, is rising in today's needy culture because we are literally trying to birth something new. We're trying to move to a new space. And so let's take a look at how we can define the sacred feminine. So first of all, I want to just preface this by saying I'm going to share some thoughts, but I don't want you to box anything in, because that's the worst thing in the world that we could do. That will send us right back into the more patriarchal dominance and control model of labeling and sort of putting things in a box and limiting things and basically limiting our expansive consciousness, our expansive potential. The sacred feminine really is not definable, but what we can do is offer some characterizations to it. We can offer some archetypes that help describe it. We can begin to look at things that are typically characterized as feminine versus what's characterized as masculine, so that we can understand how to work with it better, how to honor it more, and to feel more balanced within our life and bring balance to this grossly out of balance patriarchal dominance culture. Now, another thing I want to preface this by saying is that the sacred feminine is not about hardcore feminism. And what I mean by that is this idea that we need to emasculate the masculine, that we need to take over, that we need to basically believe that we can have dominance and control as women or as the feminine. And I also want to say that the feminine is not women and the masculine is not men. Every human being has all of these qualities within us. And actually, women are a characterization of the feminine, and men are often a characterization of the masculine, but not always. Nothing here is to be boxed in. But what we are looking at is the reality that we live in a world of contrast, a world of polarity, a world of duality, okay? And so we have the feminine and the masculine kind of countering or polarizing each other in a way where we can look at some of the different defining elements of it. And so it's not this hardcore feminism where we're trying to say, oh, the rising feminine is trying to take over and we need to shift from patriarchy to matriarchy. and all of that kind of thing. That's not what the sacred feminine is, nor is it what I call a more loosey-goosey, goddessy kind of structure where taking power back for ourselves is all about feeling like we have to dress as if we were coming out of the mists of Avalon and have these special costumes, or painting our bodies and showing our bodies more readily and whatnot. There's a danger in both of these sides. One threatens to completely emasculate the masculine, and we need the masculine, and the other threatens to see empowerment as something of escaping out of feet on the ground, moving through life, trying to find this incredible balance and this incredible dance. And often what we're seeing is, many saying that empowerment is about embracing the body and sexuality and all of that. I actually do agree with that. But here's what it doesn't look like, in my opinion. Now, this is my opinion. I may get some backlash for this, but what I see right now as a great example of this, I'm just going to share an example because I think it's more obvious than trying to, again, define it. I see young girls, teenage girls, thinking that empowerment means to show their breasts and their full bodies on Instagram, or to, basically objectify themselves. Our patriarchal dominance culture has done an amazing job of objectifying women for centuries. And women have kind of bought into that, believing that we have to measure up with how we look, how we dress, how we show up and what we're doing and all of those kinds of things. And so we buy into that and we allow ourselves to be objectified. Or what's happening now is this okay, let's take back the power, and we end up objectifying ourselves. One thing that the feminine is that I really want to emphasize is its mystery. It is the unknown. The sacred feminine is about being able to be with the mystery. And if we're just exposing everything and putting it all out there with no regard to who or why or how we're doing so, then we're not honoring the mystery. We're not honoring the sacred feminine. The feminine wants to rise. The feminine wants us to feel empowered in our bodies and be proud of the bodies that we're in and be able to look at ourselves completely nude in the mirror and say, oh my gosh, I love you. Your body's beautiful, because that is what the feminine does. It is not necessarily about this idea of flaunting and putting it out there just for the sake of saying, I'm empowered. We need to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Now, that being said, I also think there's a beauty in the feminine around decorating oneself. And so when I talk about the costumes or the crowns or the painted bodies or things like that, again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What I'm trying to get at is we are also polarizing the feminine in this process of the feminine rising, because we're struggling to know what to do with it. We're so used to the patriarchal dominance way of doing things that on the one hand, with this extreme hardcore feminism, we feel like we have to push and make things happen. And on the other hand, we are trying to kind of take back this power and just almost be non-discerning about how we're behaving and use it as an escapism and trying to kind of escape out of this blended relationship. What we're really looking for is a marriage of matriarchy and patriarchy, a sacred union of masculine and feminine. And so we want to be careful not to polarize ourselves. That I want to preface first in this concept of defining the sacred feminine. Now, I've already mentioned that the sacred feminine is very much about womb space. It is the space through which time moves. That is so much of what we're talking about, and this idea of opening ourselves to that movement, to that space. That can mean chaos, it can mean darkness, it can mean uncertainty, confusion, overwhelm, and most of us don't know how to sit with that. In a patriarchal dominance culture, we think we have to figure things out, have the answers, know the details, and it's often not considered okay to just pause and wait and see. And so we want to really honor that spaciousness of the sacred feminine. The sacred feminine is not linear. it's more of a spiraling. You know, you may notice through the cycle of your life that you come back around and you think, oh, I thought I'd dealt with that, right? I thought I'd addressed that, and here it is showing up again. But I guarantee you it's going to show up in a new way every time it comes back around. But it also often meanders. You know, we don't just get from point A to point B. We often have a lot of learning to do along the way. And that's been one of the challenges of this lack of feminine wisdom that has been in the world for centuries, is that we don't honor this meandering. We don't honor this non-linear have to get from point A to point B at whatever cost, right? Because so many people are uncomfortable with that uncertainty. Now, the feminine also brings us a tremendous amount of compassion and empathy, and these, as the corporate world would call it, the soft skills that we have a capacity to lead with, really honoring the human nature of things and not just this linear nature of things. So the sacred feminine is also rising to bring new leadership skills, new awareness, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it in the trainings available. We're seeing it in the different approaches coming forth, books being published, etc. We're seeing this rising feminine showing up in lots of different places, in lots of different ways. Now, the sacred feminine also challenges the status quo for the sake of life itself. We are seeing the status quo being challenged massively right now. We are seeing systems crumbling, not working, nothing is functioning anymore. That is because the sacred feminine is rising up, and it's showing us, it's kind of unearthing, excavating, unveiling that which we have not been seeing before, what we have not noticed before. And so this idea of challenging the status quo, challenging what is, being able to shake things up and move things in new directions for the sake of evolution, for the sake of life itself. Now, we also want to look at the fact that the feminine is also very nourishing. She nourishes us with enough, okay? And I said she. I do want to also honor that even though, again, feminine and masculine are these polarities, and we often associate with women and men, or she and he, the feminine and the masculine are not, they're not about gender at all. We can refer to it, again, archetypally for this understanding of the polarities, but understand that we all have it regardless of our gender, okay? We all have these qualities within us, these characteristics within us, all right? And so there is this quality of nurturing, and nurturing to the point of having enough, being, nurturing us with freedom, so that we have the ability to choose, right? We're being nurtured, but we have the freedom to choose what we want. We're being nourished, and we'll have enough if we're willing to also honor that we only need so much. And the sacred feminine is rising to show us that we've been greedy, we've been taking more than our share, and it's not working, right? Things are crumbling. Now, the feminine is so experiential, right? The feminine speaks to us through our senses, through our experiences, which we so often disregard as being important. We think in terms of that more masculine, linear way of thinking, where it's like you've got to have the certificate and be a scholar in order to be taken seriously, and that experience doesn't matter. And that is simply not the case. The feminine honors experience, and more we are seeing that showing up, whether it's authors who are publishing books, experiences that are putting people on stage to speak to thousands of people to share their experiences, because it's so helpful and meaningful and needed to bring wisdom to light in this world. Now, the feminine also speaks to us through our imagination, our intuition, and our inspiration, okay? So that's kind of this idea of what we're able to see and hear and intuit and know on a spiritual level, right? That is part of how the feminine speaks to us. We might be having more potent dreams. The feminine time of year is moving into the winter, which we're moving toward. And by the way, if you haven't already ordered your Sacred Nights of Winter journal, be sure to do so. There's a link in the description, and this year's journal is all about connecting with sacred feminine. So as we move into the winter season, that is a feminine season. That is a place of going to those depths, going into that space of of tuning in more to the imagination, the inspiration, the intuition, and thinning the veil and being able to connect more deeply with our soul. The feminine is also a destroyer of that which does not serve. And we begin to see some of that with kind of a purification or a purging that happens through the winter months. It's also the birther of that which we need for the sake of evolution. And that is part of what the Sacred Nights of Winter Journal is going to do, bring forth this opportunity to pay attention to what wants to birth, what wants to become through you in the coming year, okay? The feminine will always be showing us what needs to be let go of, what needs to come forth. There's this incredible diffuse awareness rather than just a focused, narrow awareness of the masculine. We need both. We need the structure to have the flow. We need the riverbanks for the river to flow through, right? But we've forgotten the feminine, and all of that is rising to the surface to be noticed, to be attended to, and we're kind of being pushed into it whether we like it or not. The sacred feminine is also an incredible advocate for true justice. Now we're seeing a lot of that showing up as well with whether it's around concepts of equal rights, women's rights, any of that. Again, we have to be careful not to polarize it and fall into the trap of what real justice is about. If we look at nature, nature balances itself. A lot of times we forget one of the things the sacred feminine brings is a greater capacity for forgiveness. And forgiveness is something that the patriarchal dominance culture doesn't really pay much attention to. And that is something that is being asked to be looked at and look at the healing nature of justice. How can we have restorative justice? That is the true sacred feminine vision of justice. And it's also, the sacred feminine is also about honoring the uniqueness in every human being, really honoring our diversity, our multi-passionate nature, our multicultural nature. All of these things are embraced by the feminine, and learning to see that all have value. There's truth in everything, and we all kind of hold like a piece to the puzzle, if you will, of the greater picture, the greater mystery. And when we're willing to join together and be more collaborative, another quality of the sacred feminine, instead of competitive or in a scarcity mindset or believing there's, if I share, then there won't be enough for me, or if I offer this, then someone will take it, that kind of thing. Or even the idea on the flip side, I need to take things in order to survive. I need to have this in order to make my way, or take more than my share in order to be okay. Those are simply not true. And the feminine wisdom rising is showing us how to look at things differently and to remember there truly is enough. Even in looking at the cycles of life, we see there's an endless cycle. And that's going to take me into this next piece of how do we connect with wisdom, with this feminine wisdom rising in a greater capacity. The biggest way that I constantly feel so deeply connected to the sacred feminine is through nature's wisdom. It's like nature is the feminine, and it's constantly reminding us of our wisdom, our inherent wisdom that we too are born with. We are nature, right? We're not in nature. We're not going to be with nature. We are nature. And if we can tune into our own natural rhythms and cycles, we see the constant abundance of a lunar cycle, for example. There will always be a new moon. There will always be another full moon. There will always be a new sunrise, right? We'd have to have some pretty massive destruction for those things to not happen anymore. And so we need to look at nature and the cycle of the seasons and the ways in which it's constantly teaching us to tune into our own rhythms. Have you ever paid attention to the ways in which your rhythms are connected to the moon cycles? I happen to be reading a book lately called Lunar Abundance. I'll leave a link in the description. It's fantastic around just tuning into what each of the 8 cycles of the moon represents, and then being able to start paying attention to that more deeply myself. What's really fascinating to me about this is even I, who am so passionate about the sacred feminine and have been teaching and guiding and studying around it for years, I've often had this association that the moon is feminine, the sun is more masculine, and this beautiful blend. Well, there's some truth to that, but this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say we can't define anything, because everything has both. And what we tend to look at, for example, with the cycles of the moon, is we look at the new moons and the full moons and the quarter moons, but we don't look at the crescent moons and the gibbous moon phases so much. We don't talk about those so much. In fact, mostly we just talk about the new and the full moons. Those are yang cycles of the moon, the more masculine phases of the moon, okay? Whereas the yin phases, the more feminine phases, are the crescent and the gibbous moons. And so we want to look at the totality of it and how is that showing up? How is it impacting our day? Nature is such a powerful, powerful guide. Nature also helps us connect with the descent, okay? We have lots of references. There's the descent of Inanna, and there's the descent of the Christ in the Christian tradition. But what are they descending to? And that's what we really need to look at. All of nature has a descent. The leaves fall from the trees, the seeds fall and become replanted, whether it's by the squirrels or nature itself and the humic material that is created from all of the leaves decomposing and new soil being generated. And the cycle continues, and there's a descent to the mother, to the feminine. The feminine takes us to our depths, creates this sort of pause, this quiet time that we are often so uncomfortable with. It's often in the dark. It's often, confusing, uncertain. The seed has to be under the soil for a while before it's ready to poke through, before something is ready to emerge. And we need to let that happen. We need to give space to those things, right? We need to give space to that emergence. And that's something we're not very comfortable doing, but if we look to nature, we can connect more deeply with that sacred feminine and the rhythms and cycles and recognize how they're showing up within us. Ultimately, everything is born of the sacred feminine, of that womb space, and everything will return to it. And the flow of life in between is what flows through this structure and form that the sacred masculine can provide for us. The patriarchal world has lost its way. The sacred feminine is rising. There is feminine wisdom rising in the world today. We can see it everywhere, and there's a lot of resistance to it, right? There's a lot of resistance to it. We're seeing old things like Roe versus Wade being overturned and the old ways trying to hang on and cling to it. And my invitation to you is to step back within yourself, because we're going to make the greatest change from here, from within, and let nature be your guide to really tune into how you can connect with the feminine wisdom rising. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, click the notification bell, share, like. All those things help the channel. It helps more women connect with their empowerment. Be sure to check out the Sacred Nights of Winter journal, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.